Warmly welcome you all. Pretty interesting times, isn't it? So we were supposed to talk about the Nordic model, and we are. But it would be interesting to hear from Johan after hearing all these statements and ideas that if capitalism is going to go towards the state control, is it fun to be a banker these days?
It's always fun to be a banker. It's just a difference how popular you are at the dinner parties. And right now, and for the last 2 decades, that's not something you brag about, loving your job in a bank. No, but I completely agree with Alexander Stubbam on the Chinese phenomena. It doesn't work. I don't believe in it for a second. You cannot. Economics is about human preferences. It's about a finite resources that you need to allocate in the wisest possible way. It's not something you can sit and dictate in an office. I think you will have 6 or 7% GDP growth. Huge argument when we set up in China. Then it was 9% dictated by the government, and we know this will be ghost towns being built if you think that government consumption is the only thing you can control, and that can be whole of GDP. GDP, by the way, per capita is highly correlated to happiness and well-being, and good to see that Finland came out as the happiest country in the world in the last UN report. But Sweden, Denmark, and everyone else is very much around it. Yeah. So I think our model of believing in the rule of law, ownership should be governed, easy to understand, openness, trade is the right one.
But you still feel that the regulation part is okay as a banker?
Well, you have to have regulation.
Sure.
Banking and finance is a very potent weapon. It can destroy a lot of things. Yeah. Heavy, sound regulation is natural. It can always be a debate if it's effective. It's over-regulation or under-regulation, and that's part of my daily life.
Sure. So, Susan, you've seen different cultures, and of course, as a Dutch person. So, how it feels to work in the Nordic countries? If you think that the Netherlands wouldn't be a Nordic country, how you feel?
Yeah, I think it is the Netherlands and certainly Finland quite alike. Yeah. But I think the one quite important and valuable difference is the level of cooperation, and then specifically cooperation between the state, the public sector, the private sector, and even culture and arts. And I think that level of cooperation is something that you don't typically see in the Netherlands, at least. So I think that small country, having the feeling of truly determining together how you want to live, I think that explains also a lot of the happiness in Finland. So that, I would say, is, for me, the Nordic model, and that is a bit Nordic. Not necessarily Central European.
Yeah. So there's an element of trust, maybe, or is it?
Yeah, there is a trust, and there is a willingness to sort of design together how you want to work together, and instead of seeing it as separated entities or separated segments in society.
Yeah. So we're pretty consensual, at least in Finland, aren't we?
Consensual, but I think also a common goal. Yeah. And that comes from living in a beautiful country, but then also designing and wanting to keep it that way. And then, as Alexander was at some side sentence saying, but I think quite important, that it goes over all political parties.
Yeah.
At moments when it comes down to it, it goes across political parties. And that, I think, is pretty unique. And it comes now to security, but it's also with environmental issues, with social issues. Then it goes, at least to me, as an outsider, it feels that it goes across parties. And that is quite a powerful thing.
Yeah. Christoph, if the editorial rooms have been hectic, during these weeks, obviously you guys have been running very, very, very much, by just withdrawing from Russia. And Alex actually mentioned that we had a really interesting interview. You were actually the first CEO in Finland to actually tell the story, what really happened, behind the scenes when you were pulling out, from Russia, and means a lot, because there's like 1/3 of your staff. was operational in Russia, and 1/3 of your market actually. So is it nice to be a Fazer CEO these days?
Yeah, it's always nice. It's always nice to be the Fazer CEO.
Yeah.
It's not quite 1/3 of our market. It's about 13% of our
13, okay.
our market,
Yeah.
but 1/3 of our employees certainly.
Okay.
I mean, just for the sake of good order, I think it's also important to say that we have not pulled out of Russia yet. We have announced that we are pulling out of Russia.
Right.
And now starts the really difficult part.
Yeah.
Making the decision to pull out was very much a decision based on our values and based on how we saw and see the future of the market. But pulling out of Russia is a whole different story.
Sure.
And I won't go into all the details that I laid out in your newspaper, but I can say that, you know, the Russian rules and regulations are one thing, and then the Western sanctions and rules are another thing. And we as companies, we have to navigate in between these two sets of rules, and that's not easy.
So actually, you've been operating into very different markets. So you have the Nordic model, you know, where you are familiar with, and then you have trained yourself to be able to be competitive in the Russian market, or the former Russian market, so to say. What has been the difference, and how would you portray the Nordic model, you know, from your perspective?
Yeah, and I mean that's something that I've worked with my entire career.
Yeah.
You mentioned that I was at Wärtsilä for 20 years, and also as the chairman of Konecranes, you know, you're seeing that, and the more Nordic model, I think, is very much a values-based model. Susan talked about openness, and you talked about trust, and so on. And I think there are a lot of people in the world that subscribe to this as an aspirational state and choose Nordic companies as places to work because of the model that we are providing. Yeah. in company governance terms, and the people want to be part of that. And I think that belief is also being a little bit tested now. Certainly in our own company. I mean, we've always been talking about openness. One of our values is Northern Liberty, which means that everybody should, you know, be able to be who they are, and you know, very inclusive, you know, regardless of nationality, regardless of what you look like, where you're from, and so on. And now we have 2,300 Russian colleagues, and we're not really sure how to treat them as an organization, as colleagues, as people. And I think this whole thing is quite testing for organizations.
Yeah. You know, from the banking perspective, Johan, do you think that I mean, there's a lot of talk about the country risk, and is there a kind of how do you see, like, the, you know, Nordics, you know, being regarded from outside world? Because this is now I mean, we have to sort of, like, you know, mirror ourselves, you know, in this geographical positioning as well.
And you're asking a bit from the context of current affairs with Ukraine, etc.
Well, I mean, yeah.
Well, I mean, because the history, it's been fantastic. And right now we're preparing a lot for the debates over the coming weeks with government in Sweden on what is the economic side, and we kind of part of this. And it's very hard to get any empirical evidence that this has cost us something in the Nordics of not being part of NATO, and the model has been extremely highly appreciated.
Yeah.
For me, I've set up home for myself in Germany, in the UK, in France, and in Sweden. Spent a lot of time in Holland and the US. And for me, it's very much about if you have a country and you're primed from birth that you're self-sufficient, that could very often lead into self-important. And self-importance leads into almost an introvert perspective. And this is where, when I go to France and set up, why would you leave anywhere? Why would you ever leave France? We have everything. And then you come from the Nordics, you're primed the opposite way. You're not an ego-centered worldview. You're actually a bystander to the globe, and you need to participate. You need to go out, you need to educate yourself, you need to welcome. And I think it's a huge part of the common denominator amongst the Nordic countries. Unless you do something outside where you grow up, you're not going to have any meaningful effect. It's like the blessing in disguise of not having a big domestic market. You need to enter into somewhere else. And I think the country premiums here, you cannot discuss in any other shape that maybe now, because part of these values is openness and all the stuff we know about democracy and export orientation of these parts of the world. And this is a huge attack on the freedom of movement of labor, of capital, of the right of ownership, the governing law, the business, which is so core. And therefore, we also announced that we're withdrawing from Russia. Maybe there's a risk premium to avoid the probability to be introduced by cooperation further. And right now the cooperation has never been stronger because we might come to a position where we are being asked. We have a big bank in the Baltics, we are in Ukraine, we're in Russia, and I can tell you the thousands of people we have in the Baltics, they're just thinking, are we next, ? And right now that's a risk premium in your life of going around thinking, the distraction for business, for value. You can't afford the sustainability transition, which should have been our number one focus today, because now we got to protect democracy, and it's a call to action. And I feel very much like many in my bank, drafted. There's a civil side of this war, not only the invasion. We are the ones chasing the oligarchs. The financial system is implementing the economic sanctions, which are significant. So we are out there every day, hundreds of people trying to find these assets, lock them. They can't do dollars. In Ukraine, we cannot do any FX. We can't ship out anything. Anyone can put money in. And I would say a word about our Russian colleagues. It's not easy to be there, because this is an internal tension that I've never even read about, because it's not geographical things pro or against your own country. It's age, which means that every single family has a domestic tension. The dinner parties, the Christmases will not be nice, because it's the young generation consumes different information, and I think they're socially imploding as well as economically. And then on top of the sanctions, we are of course having a financial market huge effect on Russia. And don't remember, IMF helped them with 25 billion when Chechnya happened. This time there's voluntary boycott from all the businesses I've ever met of Russia. So this is if there's something on steroids, it's the economic sanctions that are being multiplied to many times by businesses saying, I cannot conduct myself in this environment. We will not support doing business regardless of what we make. And then we all have very different economic aspects of taking care of withdrawing. But right now, the Russians do not yet know that next month they will get mortgage rates going up from 14% to 45%. Many of them have not yet understood that the internal devaluation of a 50% depreciation of the currency has happened. They've just lost all the purchasing power outside. And when the stock market opens, they will see that they have no money left. No pensions, no company, no nothing. And this is, of course, a way I think about the civil side of this war, that it could also implode through Russia rather than just be about Putin and his gang. Because I remember when the Russian market opened in 98, I think it was 5 days, then they put, and by the way, Putin got promoted that around, but it was 5 days when everyone in Russia understood all my savings are gone. It was down 91%, the stock exchange, when they dared to open it. And then it's no longer a debate what media you consume, because it just hurt your wallet. And a final remark is about the Russians' ability to stomach the price for this type of things through queuing. And this is a huge problem. The elderly generation, they say it's okay. We used to be 3 hours to get to the ATM machine or get my bread. We used to 50% inflation. The young generation does not accept that. And I think this will be the first test of Russia in the economic sense.
That's going to be different, yeah. What do you think, Susan? Are the business leaders, are they ready, to also in this part of the world, to get it coming? I mean,
I think that what you describe for the young Russian population is also true for a lot of business leaders, businesses, but also a lot in our societies, because I do not hear us talk about this developing into an energy war. But that, I think, is what is also about to happen. I mean, when the gas pipelines do close, then we will see very significant impact on our societies, our way of living, because the transition is not that easy. So we're now thinking like we get gas from one end or from another, but that is going to take months of building up the capacity in order to adapt all the factories, but all the greenhouses, all of that to a different type of source. So I think we're going to see a lot of impact on European, particularly European societies, and then seeing what the side effect will be once in the US this starts sinking in, that they actually will need to start supporting Europe again from a security perspective. So I think that there are going to be next steps in this that will have a very significant business impact on how we need to operate.
It of course depends on country. Even the Nordic countries are different from each other. But then, do you think that the Nordic model itself could be at least a somewhat protecting shield? Maybe not economically, but at least in a societal.
I think absolutely. I think that where there is more division within the countries, it will be more difficult to handle it. But at the same time, difficult times also bring in those countries people together. So in democracies, typically, people do bond once it's, we saw that with the pandemic, and I guess we will see the same thing with the follow-up effects, let's say, of the war, and then of us coping with isolating Russia. Because I think it is not only Russia that will be impacted, but we will be quite severely impacted ourselves. And I'm very curious to see what Alexander was saying on how that unified approach, let's say, within Europe, if that really can withstand these differences of this, the impacts that we will be seeing. Because the impact will be different on the Nordics, for example, versus Russia, versus Germany or France. So will we stay that aligned within Europe? I have my questions.
Okay. What do you think, Christoph, that, are the business leaders, ready to sort of climatize to the situation where when the inflation is going up and everything is pretty much changing, if you listen to Johan, for instance?
Yeah, well, I think business leaders have to all the time acclimatize to changing situations, and that's going to be the case this time around as well. I think that following on what Susan was saying about the Nordic model, I think society and the rules of society are built on a very or on strong social cohesion and very strong social security, and this is all in law. But when people's personal circumstances are going to change significantly, it's going to require a lot of solidarity on a personal level, and I think people's own values are going to be, tested and tried, and the whole sustainability of the Nordic model really depends on us sticking to our guns and saying that this is the model that we want, and it's not going to be as dramatic as in Russia, but food prices are going to go up here, energy prices are going to go up here, mortgages are going to cost more, and so on. So I think there will be more individualism and less solidarity, perhaps inherently.
Mm-hmm. And there's, so many disruptions, going on. You've gone through a disruptive era. Both of us have, so to say, in the media field. How you feel that, when there's disruption after disruption after disruption, how is it? It's not going to stand still anymore.
No, I think so. And The only thing is that, are we thinking far enough in sort of preparing ourselves for these next level of disruptions? We could see with the pandemic that we had all seen the movies, and we still thought it's only a movie. It's not going to happen. And I think that's the next thing with the cyber war. You know, we all know what can happen, but, you know, we have come through the pandemic by effectively working from a distance and being able to keep our communication in place, our information flows in place, and all that. What if that is impacted? So it's those type of things that will be the new challenges. But I very much agree. I mean, this is what we are here for, you know, also as societies, to constantly adapt and figure out a new way. But let's hope that it doesn't turn to complete individualism.
Yeah, Johan, I mean, would you have ever guessed, you know, seen anything like you've seen, you know, during these past weeks, thinking of, like Carl said, time of dangers and heat getting into in a scale that is just unimaginable?
Not really, but we're very used in, as bankers, we don't really try to predict. We try to prepare for the worst and hope for the best. So we do all scenarios. It's actually heavily regulated, and by nature, if you know my chairman and I, we are very worried about everything all the time. But I actually must say that was a headline in Swedish newspapers 2 days ago, said, Finland is like Sweden for adults. And it was, and it really struck a chord. We are naive, and it was some grasshopper, and we just party, and we look at the other way, and we have no clue. And then today, I've now spent 48 hours in Finland, and the number of times I've heard this, we have prepared for this for 75 years in Finland. Yeah. You've never heard anything like it in Sweden, and I was the last generation who was drafted into the obligatory military service, and here I had staff in SEB who was just in for 4 weeks, 45 years old, trying to do some type of civil defense. What we have not been surprised about is cyber. So we have been preparing for 10 years for this cyber war. It's happening as we speak, every day, all the time. Every bank, every government institution in Sweden, the public media has also confirmed that both the MSB, the unit that coordinates any response, was down. So was FRA, which is part of the Secret Service, call it the information side, and one bank has also confirmed it, that there was. So this is happening. We have a bank in Ukraine, so we were part of the general rehearsement in 2015, what's called NotPetya, where they actually did close down Ukraine for 3 days, including hospitals, banks, and the roadwork and airports. And I'm very, very positively surprised that was a blessing in disguise, is everything, because we all started to spend billions on cyber defense, and we learned a lot. So right now, we are testing it for the first time, and I am amazed, and we must think that Americans must have helped them, that they have not shut down electricity, they haven't shut down telecom, and they haven't shut down the financial system in Ukraine, and they must have tried. Sure. And when we see the code, which is coming our way, it's planted everywhere. They can activate it at any time. I think everyone who doesn't think about this needs to think about it all the time. It's the number one risk here. It has held against very, very well. Yeah. The other risk I just want to point is not necessarily what's happening in Ukraine. It's the escalation of conflicts with India and China, which we are super worried about right now. Because if you try to circumvent the economic sanctions, we have seen the Americans since 9/11 use the sanction list and the OFAC and everything for political will. And what I'm reading about yesterday's negotiations between India and Russia about buying more weapons, more energy, and circumventing the financial sanctions through the shutdown of SWIFT. You can't find a way around it by accepting the domestic Russian payment system. We will have a much, much tenser situation in a few days if this continues.
This is interesting. I mean, thinking about the open banking system and all that. What I mean, and the banking as a service. Like, you know, what would you say about that? Because this is very hot topic.
Yeah, I wouldn't draw. Now I switch gear completely.
Okay. Yeah.
And this is not necessarily anything to do with the current affairs. Banking as a service is an idea which has been around now for 5-6 years, and I believe very strongly in it. It's the heavily regulated financial side which is not easy to replicate for anyone. We have something called Apple Pay and Apple Card in the US, and Apple has the close to infinite resources. They try to disrupt the payment system, which is really controlled today by Visa and MasterCard. It's the credit card. And they say it's too difficult, and no one wants to become a bank. So only the banks would like to be banks. And people in the startup community, they're realizing this the hard way. Yeah. Many of them tried, and they get huge problem, and they have to have hundreds of people every year added to their compliance unit. So the idea is very simple. We love our bank. We love the bank license we have. Let's lend it out to anyone who wants to use it. And this means the idea is, if you take it all the way, is that any company in here or government will be their own bank, but they will be ran on the infrastructure and the rails of someone who knows how to do it. But you take away the layer between the bank and the customer and allow anyone who meets any customer to have their own payment infrastructure. And this is happening as we speak. And there's only 3 banks in the world who has openly talked about that they are piloting it and hopefully doing it. We are one of those 3. And hopefully we'll have our first retail client signed on this year. We start very humbly with 500,000 customers of that retailer. And we will be the bank, and they probably won't know it's us. They will just meet their retailer, which they are frequently shopping with, and they will have the payment, and they will have a MasterCard and Visa, and they get anything they want in their financial life from that one. And it will not be them setting up a bank. They will run it on our rails.
Okay, interesting. So, final question. Just going through the rows, I would say there's a question from the audience. Like, how important are the NATO membership for businesses in Sweden and Finland? What would you say? I mean, this is Johan a little bit touched upon. What comes to the country risk, but what would you say? What's your guesstimate?
I would say that security is extremely important for any business. Stability is even more important for any business. And I think NATO membership is certainly something that is going to stabilize and secure the region.
How about Susan?
Yeah, I think you have the short and the long term. I would have been interested to hear Alexander explain the short-term risks coming from that. Yeah. That anyone. I have no idea about. I would leave that to them to answer. That short-term impact will, of course, be one of the considerations, but the long-term makes, of course, complete logic. That, as you say, safety is one of the key elements, and we need to defend our way of living.
Clearly beneficial for a business if we were to join. I think everyone, I've never heard anyone who's against it. But I must say that we have been very successful being without it as well. So let's not forget that today we might over-dramatize where we are. But regardless, if you want to de-risk, joint efforts and collaboration are always good in my book.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, Johan Torgeby, Susan Duinhoven, and Christoph Vitzthum, thank you very much indeed.